About 5 months ago, I released my first ever devlog. I had largely put game development aside after creating two major games, Hermit Home Designer and Negentropic Wandering, the first being a success and the latter a failure. I was frustrated with releasing one game that got a lot of players and attention, and another that received none. That frustration built up until I decided to return to game development and try my best to create a fun and appealing game better than anything I had made before. That was the drive behind Love MO1, the dating simulator I am developing. Unexpectedly, making this game reignited a passion for game development that I had lost, and before I knew it, I was working on several projects at once. I returned to an abandoned duck game and finished it up for release in about a month and a half. I also started on a moody visual novel, an N64 petting zoo, and a Pokemon-like game called Pico Pals. I've been prototyping ideas and starting new projects that teach me a lot, but those side projects have become a distraction. Love MO1 hasn't received major updates in months, despite originally being the sole project I planned on working on. It's time to put away the side projects and focus on the game that got me back into game development. But the reason my attention drifted away from Love MO1 isn't just because other projects became more appealing. There are major problems with Love MO1 that I was failing to address in its design that hampered my expectations for the full project should it be completed. I even considered abandoning the project and all of the progress I had made on it to completely focus on more promising projects. I knew that if I were to return to this project, I would have to reconsider its game design fundamentally. First, we have to understand the design as I'd left it last time. Love MO1 is a dating and life sim that takes place over 2 years of community college. The player has one time unit per day to spend on studying, going out, working, or resting, with each option increasing and decreasing the player's stats. The stats are humanities, science, art, culture, athletics, charm, money, and stress. Most actions are limited to weekends, including calling girls to ask them out on dates, going into town, and going on dates. The player meets new girls based on their stats and the classes and clubs they join. There are random encounters with girls in which you can ask to walk them home. When on a date, the player can do a location-based activity which involves a 3-option dialogue choice, play a word-selecting game, give gifts, and gossip about the town to learn new information. This game loop is repeated until the end of the game in which one girl is chosen by the player. This time around making a game, I was sure to do proper playtesting. When I released my game Hermit Home Designer, I didn't do any playtesting, and as a result, there are huge chunks of the game that I've seen players completely ignore. I had 2 playtesters at my disposal and ran playthroughs on them. What I learned from my playtesting is that the game just wasn't fun. That doesn't mean the game was bad, it just wasn't fun. What I mean is that the game was interesting, it had engaging mechanics and appealing content, but it didn't have any gamey elements that make a game fun. There was a clear lack of feedback and response in the game. What I realized was that there was a dissonance between 2 goals in my game design. On one hand, I set out to make a gamey game, and on the other hand, I wanted to make a game based on intrinsic motivation. My first game, Hermit Home Designer, is a designing and decorating game which features no goals or constraints. The game's levels are completed by clicking a finished button in the corner of the screen. This game's design is based around intrinsic, unrewarded motivation, which I originally wanted to feature in Love MO1. I thought that intrinsic motivation would drive players to want to date the characters and progress the story, but there was a problem with my playtest builds. There was hardly any writing. Without writing, the game's date dialogue options were placeholders, and there wasn't any date-specific writing to motivate players to keep dating. But the lack of writing forced me to focus on refining the game design. It's easy to just say I'll add writing later, and it'll be interesting then. I want the game to be fun, even with all the flavor and theming removed. To figure out where the game went wrong, I revisited the game's main inspiration, Tokimeki Memorial. Tokimeki Memorial 1 and 2 are what I consider to be my favorite games, but I hadn't played them in a long time. This is because the games are only available in Japanese, and I played the games years ago when learning Japanese, a hobby I abandoned after about 2 years of intensive AJAT. I have fond memories of playing the games alongside a Japanese dictionary and figuring out bits of dialogue I didn't understand. But my at the time pretty good Japanese skills had completely faded without use, so I opted to play a fan translation of the SNES version, which is inferior to the PS1 version. The thing is, I just didn't enjoy Tokimeki Memorial as much this time around. I think the experience of struggling through the Japanese dialogue was a major part of why I liked the game so much in the first place. In English, the game suffers from the same problems as Love MO1. What I set out to do is add extrinsic motivation to the game, which means transforming the dates into actual games. For this, I took new inspiration from another dating sim, Honey Pop. I completely changed the genre of my game into a match 3 game. I thought it would be easy to just follow a tutorial to make a match 3 game in Unity, but surprisingly there aren't any ones that worked for me. One tutorial even used Unity's tags for enumerating the tile types, which is a terrible idea. So I had to make my own system, which wasn't too difficult. I made sure to borrow Honeypop's feature that tiles can be moved to any tile on the same column or row, because this adds more depth to match 3 games than only allowing adjacent tiles to move. Match 3 turns out to be a perfect fit for this game, because previous feedback suggested that the stats didn't do enough, and I agree with that. The stats were checked for encounter chances and at the end of the game when selecting your favorite girl, but besides that, they were just numbers going up. This is how Tokimeki Memorial handles stats. But with Match 3, the stat types perfectly correspond to tiles on the game board. This way, the score you receive from a match is determined by your associated stat type, making the choice of what stats to increase meaningful. This also integrates the stress stat better into the game, which was previously only used to determine if the player got sick. Now there are bad stress tiles that take more score away the higher the stress stat is. Similarly to Honeypop, there is an attraction level gained by matching heart tiles that add a score multiplier to all matches. My game is different from Honeypop in that the attraction and affection score for the girls are persistent across matches. In Honeypop, every new date has a greater score requirement and the passion/attraction level resets. The strategy is to get attraction/passion matches early on to increase the score multiplier before making matches. In Love MO1, there is no max score for a date because the score directly corresponds to the girl's attraction, and both the affection and the attraction multiplier persist for the whole game. Along with the affection, there is also a normalized hidden score calculated without the stats to determine if the individual date went well. This hidden score is used to determine if the player has reached certain thresholds that trigger a date activity that were previously clicked on in the UI. This way, the player has to do well on the date to access gossip about the town to learn new locations. The 3 option dialogue choices can now give the player more turns rather than being tied to the affection. The conversation word choice game has been moved to the random encounters and replaced walking the girls home. Walking the girls home was borrowed from Tokimeki Memorial, but didn't really fit with the college theme of Love MO1. I had a playtester say no to walking home all of the girls, because she only wanted to walk with the main girl that she was romancing. With the chatting game, the player can now increase the fuse on the love bombs by selecting words that correspond to the girl's likes and dislikes. Another problem found when playtesting is that the players weren't using the calling function to see the girls' profiles because they didn't want to waste a time slot by calling. I solved this problem by no longer giving the player a girl's phone number when they are first met, but instead phone numbers have to be gotten by calling Olivia to see a character's profile. I added emoji-based phone numbers to the profile that correspond to the respective girl. In addition to the major Match 3 update, I am changing the art style and resolution. Previously, I had been making art drafts in Clip Studio in 1080p, but now I am making all assets as vectors in Adobe Illustrator and exporting to 4K. While the new assets are still only drafts, they show significant improvement over the originals. I'm also removing the baked-in texturing from the assets because they clash with the textureless UI. Instead, I'm using film grain post-processing with a marker-like texture to get consistent and dynamic texturing across the whole screen. With this major update to the game, I'm ready to dive back into development and hopefully finish the game. I have plans for mini-games including an RPG battling system. For more updates, subscribe, and follow my X for Screenshot Saturday posts. The game is live on Steam, so go give it a wishlist. This has been Ryan9, thank you for watching.